Dr. Vigna is a professor of computer science here at UCSB and co-founder of LastLine Incorporated. His interests include malware analysis and anti-malware solutions, vulnerability assessment, binary analysis, and web and mobile phone security. He serves as the program chair of the International Symposium on Recent Advances in Intrusion Detection, the ISOC Symposium on Network and Distributed Systems Security, and the IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy. He's also an IEEE Fellow and a senior member of the Association for Computer Machinery. Dr. Vigna runs the annual International Capture the Flag hacking contest that involves dozens of teams from around the world. So please welcome Dr. Vigna.
Thank you. Clicker. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you for the marvelous introduction. I apologize for my sorry state, but I broke my ankle on Sunday, so I'm still dealing with my mobility issues. I usually talk and move my hands a lot because I'm Italian, and I also like to stroll while I'm talking, so this is going to be a new experience going back and forth like this, but I think I got it. So let's see if this works. Kinda. Perfect. Okay, I have been introduced. I'm gonna briefly reintroduce myself. Of course, I'm a professor here. I work in system security. So as you know, there are, in security, there are the cryptographers and there are people who do what we call system security. I'm one of the latter. The crypto guys are too mathy for me and too nerdy of a crowd to hang out with. And one thing that I do with my research is to try to make my sort of research available to the public. And so historically, we've been trying to put out either through portals or through open source the results of our research. Some of you might remember Anubis and Wepawet. There was some security tools that came out of our lab. Recently, we've been focusing on binary analysis, and Anger is a framework that some researchers use. I also the CTO of a company that I co-founded called LastLine, and I work on malware analysis, threat intelligence, and various other aspects. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit of something that, is really things that I do both at UCSB and in different ways in my company. And also, I am the founder of a hacking team called Shellfish. It might be that if you go around campus, you see people having that logo on their shirts. This is the longest participating team at the DEF CON Capture the Flag, which is sort of like the world championship of hacking. However, we organize our own competitions, as you have heard, and we participate in plenty of them. We also participated in something called the Cyber Grand Challenge. There was a DARPA competition, and we did pretty well. Actually, we took home a cash prize of $1.5 million, which allows now us to, celebrate and create various, events where we can convince people to join and, learn about cybersecurity. So I do a lot of stuff. I worked on everything from binary analysis to phone security to privacy and web security, network security. Today I'm going to focus on malware analysis because this has been both a big focus of my research and also one of the reasons why I started my company as a tech transition of what we do here at UC Santa Barbara. So let's talk about malware. Actually, let's talk about threats. If you look at what the threat is defined as in a dictionary, it's something that's going to hurt you. And you all always deal with threats every day. You guys are the people in the trenches. Maybe you're not really installing a sniffer to detect something, but you are involved in the pipeline of actions that brings, somebody to say, we have to solve this problem, to here's something that is deployed to solve the problem. And in our context, of course, threat is a bad guy that is determined to break the security of your system and cause some damage. I consult and I work as a company in many environments, and you can find different type of targets, different type of problems. Sometimes we work with NGOs, and their problem is more nation state trying to compromise their system to gather intelligence. When you work with manufacturing enterprise, you will hear from Dragos here. The problems are more about the continuity of the process and not being disrupted. And so, of course, every environment is different, but it stays that somebody is there, to get you. And when you talk about threat, of course, I'm an academic, so I start thinking about what is threat terminology. You have a lot of things that you hear about threat research, so finding out about what's new out there. Threat intelligence, which is gathering information that allows you to understand and better contextualize something. You have threat analysis, which is what some of you are involved in, so understanding the threat and performing analytic. Threat detection, which is the actual act of detecting a threat. And threat response, which is another thing that some of you unfortunately have to dab in when you have an actual problem. And then you have a third part that is threat hunting. That has been, especially in the industry, a very sort of like new concept where you're not limited to setting up your alarm and your protection system and then react whenever something gets tripped. But now you actually actively looking for something that is wrong. So instead of waiting for something blatant to happen, like your whole file system has been encrypted, you are looking for signs out there that something is wrong. And that's something that is important. Why I'm telling all of this? Because this is how you deal with a threat in different ways. You have different type of threat actors. You're all familiar with this. You have cyber criminals. Once upon a time, that was fundamentally the only problem that people had, and that was great. We could confine them in their little financially driven modus operandi. Of course, then we had hacktivists of various form. Hacktivists have been disrupting services with various motivations. Usually they're not financially motivated, but can be disruptive and can cause problems. And more recently, and I'm talking about the last 10 years or so, we have been seeing really cyber warfare becoming super important. And there are some sort of like overlaps between these two. I think that one of the trends that I find more disturbing / interesting is the fact that there are nation states that track the cyber criminals, for example, that control large botnets, and sometimes go to these criminals and say, hey, I could put you in jail for 50 years, or you give me access to your botnets because you happen to have 250,000 feelers in the internet, and maybe I can use your infrastructure to do searches for things that I have interest in. And I think this is very interesting because really brings sort of the normal crime and the nation state, politically motivated crime or cyber warfare activity, whatever you want to call it, together. And this is an alarming trend. And of course, you always have insiders. And I put it there very last because I think that the insider problem is the most difficult problem. If you talk to three-letter agencies, that's what they're really worried about. I don't think there are good solutions, but intelligence, of course, is the basis for everything. And intelligence about actions. So we have seen in the last few years an increase in sophistication of the attack. They use very sophisticated tools. They use multi-vector attacks and multi-step attack. And once upon a time, we looked at attacks as, boom, this particular exploit was thrown, they break into the system, that's it. Nowadays, we know that an attack is a whole set of steps. First they scan you, then they break into you, then they get a foothold on your system, and then they spread laterally. And actually there is a whole framework that has been developed, is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you might know, that describes all these different aspects. And unfortunately, it's not easy to detect all these aspects, depend on the type of analysis tools that you have and the type of data that you can access. And this is a big challenge, because in some situations it's not easy to get the right data to detect the right type of step. And of course, once you have malicious actors, you have an idea, and you have malicious actions, there is the problem of linking actions to actors, the holy grail of attribution. And this is something that traditionally has been based on 4 things, the tradecraft, so what kind of techniques the bad guys use, the infrastructure that they rely upon, so the same type of IP addresses or bulletproof hosting, the malware that they use, the type of code, and the intent, so the ultimate goal of what appears to be the problem. And attribution, there are entire companies that work on attributing attacks to actors. And it's a very difficult job for a number of reasons. First of all, because if you think about a physical kinetic attack, you always have some physical evidence that something happened. You have a missile trace. You have somebody moved bullets from place A to place B. While instead, we have seen, especially lately, that the trail left by these attacks can be compromised, can be used to hide the real intent. And actually, I was looking, this is something that came out a couple of days ago, that there are some Russian hackers that pretend to be something, Iranian when they were attacking other people. And there is also a recent article on the Olympic destroyer malware. This was something that attacked the infrastructure of the Olympics in South Korea. And when they looked at it, it looked like it was North Korea, obviously, because they are in conflict with South Korea. But then they started looking at various aspects, and they noticed that there were actual implants in the malware that were left there to drive threat analysts to believe a certain thing. And actually, it took several days and weeks of work to unravel all these different pieces of evidence and get to the final conclusion, which of course is just a hypothesis, is very difficult to verify. There were the Russians behind these attacks again. And so the problem is very hard, and so we need to scale it. So it's a difficult problem, identifying the attacks, associating the attacks with specific actors, understanding why they're doing this. And so there are solution providers who want to move from a framework in which they have to hire a ton of people to manually look into things to something that can be run in a data center, okay, and can be automated, so they can be scaled. And even the organizations that have to work, they want to move from an environment where everybody is not very prepared and has to run with their head on fire to solve problems on a continuous basis to something more structured and more systematic, supported by good tools. And for this, people have looked into artificial intelligence. And this is going to be the focus of the rest of my talk. How is artificial intelligence allowing organizations, providers to scale the security operations of organizations of all kinds in order to solve the security problem? And this came in recent years like the promise, artificial intelligence is going to do it. And I think there was not a security company that didn't have AI in it, to the point that I was visiting a bank in Italy, and this analyst had a big poster from Pulp Fiction where there is Samuel Jackson, pointing a gun and say machine learning once more. So that gave me pause, of course, because I work in this field. It's like, okay, I understand the despise for the term, and I think a lot of the problem with this comes from hype. So you can find there is a lot of press about artificial intelligence, what it can do, but people are feeling that there is so much that everything is presented in this supernatural form almost, that AI can solve all your problems. Well, we want to, in this talk, get a little behind the curtains, like Dorothy did with The Wizard of Oz, and see that maybe AI is presented as this flashy thing that is doing all these, impossible tasks at scale, but it's actually something very simple that can be used with, a little grain of salt and a little caveats here and there, but it's just another tool in your tool set. So let's talk about it a little bit. So, first of all, I am a professor, so I need to have Venn diagrams in my talk, otherwise I'm not satisfied. So I will start clarifying a little bit of terminology. So people look at artificial intelligence as a large set of algorithms with the task of reproducing some sort of intelligence behavior. Within this set of algorithms, you have machine learning. It's a subset of artificial intelligence. Within machine learning, you have deep learning. That's something that you hear a lot. Actually, I saw that there was a talk today about deep fakes and all that super cool stuff. And one thing that you hear a lot about is anomaly detection. And anomaly detection is often presented as the same thing as artificial intelligence. Well, it's not. We will see what it is. It's very different from artificial intelligence, and it's sort of like an intersection with these techniques. So let me first clarify this. So AI is, if you look at how it's defined, is the study of how you can replicate some human capabilities that appears to be sort of intelligence. Okay, you can have two types of AI. You can have simulation and emulation. Okay, in simulation, you actually sort of like represent the behavior as perceived. So it's sort of like when you're talking to your, Amazon Echo, and you say, Alexa. Okay, there's none in it. And suddenly you can talk to something, and that person understands you. I already called Alexa a person. You can tell you that it's a very good simulation. My kids talk to Alexa all the time. They ask jokes, spelling. Looks like a person. It's simulating an assistant. Emulation is different. Emulation is when you try to actually reproduce the mechanisms that bring intelligence. So think about the positronic brain of Android in Asimov stories. Who's a big fan of Asimov here? Nerds United. Okay. Think about that. That was the concept of emulation. I'm going to reproduce the same mechanism. So for example, if you look at expert systems, these are artificial intelligence that try to capture the expertise of somebody. It's not machine learning. There is somebody who puts together a big if-then-else tree, like if the temperature is high and you have red dots, then possibly you have measles. And these are the expert system capture this information and simulate a doctor or simulate an oil analysis system. And so they capture the data, they reproduce it, and they're able to transfer this in an automated fashion. And of course, these are used in security. Most of your rule-based analysis of traffic, they're expert systems because there is some analyst that is knowledgeable that put together these rules, made it in a sandbox for malware analysis, on rules for network analysis, and they're able to reproduce the effects of a security expert. And you can see that this is a form of artificial intelligence that is not machine learning. Okay, so you already see this point. What is machine learning? So machine learning instead, in general, is the idea of being able to process a ton of data and then making predictions. It's really, those type of predictions, but mostly I have to move because my leg gets really tired. But mostly it is this. So you take data in, You look at the data, and you're able to say something about the next piece of data that comes to your attention. That's great. We can do that. And we can do this to do two main things. We can do aggregation, and we can do classification. You're like, what? Stay with me. Let me tell you about the two big families of machine learning, so that whenever somebody, a vendor, or a crazy students come to you with some machine learning solution for security, you can say, hey, wait, is this supervised machine learning or unsupervised machine learning? Let's start with unsupervised machine learning. This is not very deep. You know, you can do this. So there are a bunch of data, and you start asking things about the data, like, you know, are they round, more than 3 sides, and so forth, color. And then these are features that you associate with each piece of data. And you just, you know, decide this, height, color of your eyes. Once you do that, machine learning algorithms in unsupervised way allow you to, you know, group together things that appear to be the same. This is really what unsupervised machine learning does: clustering, aggregation, being able to tell, hey, this group of events look the same according to all the features that you told me about. That's great, okay? Then there is supervised machine learning. In this case, we still have some qualification of the different things, but I have some grounded truth. I know for at least a subset of the data, for example, that the reds are bad, it's malware, and instead the blue, greens, oranges are good. Once I know this about a subset of the data, I can tell something about the remaining data. So I have all the bad stuff on one end, and I know this a priori. So I already know that's why it's supervised. I told the system, hey, this subset is bad. This subset is good. This subset in the middle, I don't know anything about. And so the system learns that, hey, this is more similar to the bad stuff. I call it bad. This is more similar to the good stuff. I call it good, and so forth and so on, okay? So by doing this, the system becomes a classification system. So I'm able to learn how to classify data that I haven't seen before. Okay, these two concepts, aggregation and classification, are, and I'm sure there's somebody here that's like, that's an oversimplification. It is an oversimplification, but I'm making it, you know, very basic so that we have a common understanding of how this works, okay? But these are the two mechanisms used in machine learning, and especially in machine learning and security. Because you can see immediately how, you know, aggregation, for example, allows you to say, hey, all these emails are very similar to each other. Maybe there's some different, but they come in a wave, and they have the same type of, they're all spam. So with one action, I'm going to take care of all these emails, and instead of having to do 40,000 individual decisions, okay? Or you can even use that to say, hey, all this group of things I know of, okay? All this group I know, oh, there's this one thing that does not belong to any group. What is it? And so you identify something that is anomalous, that is different, also useful. And of course, there is the classification part, the supervised machine learning driven capability for security. Yeah, I already told you, you know, you take malware, you take benign software and say, figure it out. Come automatically up without any human involved with a decision procedure so that when I see another executable on my network, I know if it's malicious or not. So aggregation is very useful. Classification allows me to automatically create a detection system. And so this is fundamentally how machine learning is used in security. And of course, you know, the basic idea here is that you want the humans out of the loop. You don't want people in the process, because the moment you add people, it becomes costly, it's error prone, and so forth. So this is the basic idea behind security. Great. So all this is very good and uses, you know, traditional techniques for borrowed from AI and machine learning. The problem is these techniques have been developed in domains that are not security. So the most effective deep learning, machine learning, decision trees, expert system have been developing in image recognition, in natural language processing. So understanding voice, understanding images. And guess what? These environments are not adversarial. They're not trying to resist classification, okay? And instead, in security, you're taking these algorithms that have been developed in those environments and you're applying to a domain where there is an adversary who's actually working to resist your attempt to capture their behavior, their normality, their aggregation parameters, okay? And this is something that creates a huge problem in security, especially because there is there are often situations in which people take these algorithms and apply them in security, and immediately they work like a charm. And they're like, score, problem solved. Until the security guys say, oh, you're using that? I can fool that. It's easy if I know what you're doing. And in fact, machine learning is very challenging because you have to know how good is your data set, how good are your features, how good are your algorithm, how do you deal with change? Because of course, once you model something, that something already has started to change. And so when you do that in security, it becomes even more difficult. So imagine this scenario, classic machine learning for imaging scenario. We have cats, we all love cats, we have a lot of cat pictures. That's not something we're gonna run out. We have billions of them, so we put all these images in our machine learning thing, and the next time a machine comes, next time a picture of a cat shows up, we say cat. Google is super good at this. I mean, Google doesn't say just cat. If you look, Google now, Google Brain is able to say, this is a guy on a motorbike jumping in midair, okay? It's crazy. They're able to recognize all these amazing, feats in the system. But now imagine a situation in which somebody can start polluting your data set with something that is cattish, but not as cattish. And so when this comes up, people say, oh, cat, because the adversary has polluted the data set from which you're learning, okay? That's an important aspect that people that work in image recognition haven't thought of, okay? Also, it could be possible that, okay, maybe your data set is not polluted, but I have learned that you now, out of this data set, have realized that a cat is somebody with tail and pointy ears. If I can steal and understand what you have learned, then I can show up and be recognized as a cat, even if I'm not a cat. All these are forms of adversarial machine learning, which makes it really, really hard to build reliable machine learning solutions that are resistant to this type of attack. And this is an open problem in research. We're working on it right now because we don't have the solution just yet. So we have things that improve and makes it harder and harder to carry out these attacks, but we don't have a solution yet. It's really something that we don't have it. And as I said, if you have to learn and label things in an adversarial setting, it's really hard because of all this difficult aspect of keeping your model secret, keeping your data set clear. So this is not what machine learning was designed for. And actually, I have a great story from Facebook. Facebook does the tag, they recognize their face. And I was talking to somebody who say, wow, one of the problems that we have are kids. Because kids can be a little, playful. So you know what they do? When they have to tag something, they take a lamp and they say, that's Giovanni, just to mess with, the picture. So I'm tagged as a lamp. And like, oh, I'm not that lamp. But this is adversarial machine learning for Facebook, because now in their algorithm, they have a bunch of my faces and then a lamp. And they have to find out, this is not like the others. Maybe they're trying to do something weird. So even in that setting that is not a determined Russian super hacker against you, you can have problems. And we are doing that. The research is here. So if you are interested in exploring the researchy aspect of all this, there is plenty of research out there that focuses exactly on this problem. For example, there are attacks against neural networks that start in a way try to perturbate your perception of something. And let me just do a super fast digression on what neural networks are, because you hear about deep fakes and deep neural networks. I'm sure that the speaker will have an introduction to deep neural networks, but machine learning oftentimes in deep learning operates as an optimization problem. So when you want to classify something, imagine that your decision space is made of mountains, okay? It's multi-dimensional mountains, but they're still mountains and they're valleys. And your error is very high on the mountains and your error is very low on the valleys. So what you do is something called gradient descent, and you go down the mountain and you find the valley. And that is when you did good. Your error is minimized, okay? Now, the problem is that if you think about, the most simple thing, there is only one valley, there is a clear point that that's the correct one. But when you have a whole landscape of valley and mountains, I can drive using certain features in my sample, I can drive you through a different path down to a different valley. And in fact, in machine learning, there are these adversarial attacks where they change a few pixels in an image, and suddenly something that was supposed to be an ostrich is detected as a bunny, okay? Because they drove that decision through a different valley. And so these perturbation attacks are very strong. And in fact, there is this accessorized to a crime. This is a colleague of mine, Lujo Bauer, from Carnegie Mellon. And they find out they took the state-of-the-art facial recognition system, and they proved that having those little glasses with the funky rims would allow to drive decisions, so he's recognized as the actress from Death something, Zombies, what is that? Resident Evil, thank you. I don't remember her name, I should, but the Resident Evil actress. And so you can tell that very little perturbation can drive decisions very far from the original aspect. And the last one, stealing machine learning via prediction APIs is also a very interesting research aspect. So Microsoft, Google, and so forth provide, and Amazon, provide machine learning as a service, okay? So what you do, you want to apply machine learning, you don't have the in-house knowledge, you just take a big CSV file, a common separated value file, a spreadsheet, you upload this to Amazon, they do their magic, and now you can say, predict next data. It's like, okay, this is what, how I would classify this data. 25 cents, thank you. Predict this data. This is what I think it is. 25 cents, thank you. Well, these guys found out that could exploit a concept called transferability, which is if I can query you as an oracle about what you think about my data and what you have learned, I can steal everything you have learned. And I demonstrated with a few hundred queries, that could replicate everything that has been learned with a lot of CPU time and memory and electricity on the other side, in a way, destroying the economical model of machine learning as a service. There are ways around it, and of course, these people are doing the right thing because they don't want to lose the money, but it shows how easy it is to steal somebody else's model. And that's because really, once you learn something, imagine you learn something of a certain population. So that is not something that is proprietary. That's the reality that you capture. So if I can probe you, of course I can reproduce reality because you have that as a characterizing aspect of this population. So this concept of artificial intelligence and model transferability seems like a very abstract concept, but means I can steal your stuff, Okay? So you have to keep this in mind when you devise machine learning-based security systems. So this research is ongoing. We looked at all sorts of things. Actually, even in my lab, we're focusing on machine learning in many different ways, not only to catch stuff. For example, we use machine learning to identify which parts of the code are more prone to find vulnerabilities. And that works. Why? Because if I am analyzing the Linux kernel code, I don't have developers that are adversarial and they're trying to sneak in well, some of them do, but most of the time I'm looking for human error. So I don't have an adversary. But the moment you apply this to an adversarial setting, all hell breaks loose, okay? So you want to do artificial intelligence done right? Great. You have to have the right data set. So you have to learn from something that is representative of what you're trying to learn. You have to filter data to prevent adversarial pollution of your data. This is huge. It's an open problem because, think about it. How do you filter your data? Well, I upload something to VirusTotal and it tells me if it's good or bad. Well, yeah, that's another oracle. What if that oracle is wrong? Now you have a different level of pollution. Another aspect, if you, for example, are working with malware, which we do a lot, you want to make sure that you just don't look to the outside aspects of malware. We had a big research effort in my lab to show the problem with packing malware, to using static analysis to analyze malware. That doesn't work. Why? Because malware, when it arrives on your network, is protected in some kind of obfuscation shell. So if you just look from the outside, you don't really see the behaviors that are inside. You have to unpack them, extract them, see what they're doing, usually in a sandbox, and then make your decision. Then it works. But if you look only from the outside, that outside can be changed very easily to look like the guy with the pointy ears and the tail and bypass your execution. Also, you need to use machine learning in depth. So if you using one pony with one trick to solve the problem, you're going to have definitely serious consequences. You want to have several machine learning based techniques that cover different angles at the same time. You all learned about security in depth. Well, there's now AI or machine learning in depth. You cannot do just one approach. You have to have belt and suspenders because that's how it works. And of course, you want to learn the right thing and make sure that you got it right. And now that you are experts in artificial intelligence and how it is used in security, we're perfectly on time to talk about anomaly detection. Okay, let's go back to the 80s. And there was, this concept of we were all doing intrusion detection, and we were using rules because there was no real machine learning at that point. I mean, there was, but it was not applied to security. And so we had two big fields. We have misuse detection. That means I'm going to model the devil. I'm going to write signature that tells me these are all the things that I consider bad. And whenever I see one of those things, I'm going to scream, alert, alert. That's misuse detection. We do it today. I mean, when you load in Suricata your network rules, you have rules that say, if I see a connection with these parameters, that's bad. You do it already. But in the 80s, somebody, Dorothy Denning, came out with this idea and say, wait a second. And this is the paper. They say, wait a second. Instead of modeling what's bad, I want to model what's good. And then anything that is not good is going to be bad. The advantage of this, boom, mind blown. The advantage of this, like, I can detect attacks that I don't know in advance. Because now that I model everything that is good, everything that is not in my model is bad. And so I don't care if you came out with a new, foobar attack that is all cool. It's outside my model, and so I detect you. Fantastic. Everybody's like, problem solved. Well, why don't we have anomaly detection in the 80s? Well, because people start doing it and say, oh, let's model good behavior. Great. Well, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of expert knowledge. Imagine that you have to write rules for every piece of your network that you are monitoring or responsible for, and you have to say everything that is, you have to know everything, okay? Also, it will be very difficult to model, all the aspects, so your model will be always incomplete, and the moment you say done, you're already outdated, okay? So you can see that anomaly detection as a concept was a very good concept. I want to model what's good and find out what's not good as an attack. The problem is if you have to do it manually, like you would have done in the 80s, you were toast. And you can see now why you hear anomaly detection so associated with machine learning. Because now machine learning enables anomaly detection. Because instead of writing down what's good, what if you learn good behavior? And so you can automate this. You don't need an expert. You can cover, billions of data items, and you can do it on a regular basis, so you're never outdated. So you can see why anomaly detection is different from machine learning. Machine learning is the thing that nowadays allows you to do something that we defined in the 80s, which is anomaly detection. You can do anomaly detection without machine learning. It's just a pain in the neck. Instead, with machine learning, you have a chance to do it right. And so imagine you observe the network, anomaly detection. The concept is that you observe the network, you establish some baseline, and now you're like, oh, nobody ever did a remote desktop connection to that machine. Alert. Or, oh my God, there is this, the administration office at UCSB is uploading 5 gigabytes to a host in Russia. Anomalous. Okay? This is the promise of anomaly detection. Establishing a baseline, learning what's normal, and then give you anomalous events. Of course, this is all great, but there are a few problems that we have to iron out. The first is that there is an assumption that bad is anomalous. Who recognizes this guy? Jeffrey Dahmer, serial killer, eats people, But if you look at an interview on Dateline, he looked like the most normal guy. He was well-mannered, very nice, doesn't look like a freak. And this guy had heads of people in his fridge. So bad is not always anomalous. And of course, the opposite is also true. Anomalous is not always bad. Again, this is the monster from the Goonies, which pretty anomalous looking, but save the day, save the kids, is the hero of the situation. So these two assumptions are ingrained in the concept of anomaly detection. And if these are violated, of course, you have all sorts of problems. Because you start, getting fires in your network for various reasons, unusual data transfer, super long TCP session, some problems with DNS and so forth. And suddenly, if you just use anomaly detection, your network is constantly on fire. And I must say, universities are particularly vulnerable to this. Because if you are in a very systematic environment where processes are always the same, it's easier to set up baseline and identify violations. But in a university, I compile code, then start writing papers, then I launch an experiment in which I scan half of the internet. Kevin calls me and say, what's going on, Giovanni? You can't do that. I say, okay, I'll do it a different way. And so all this stuff happens all the time, right? So the result is falses. Either you have false positives and you'll be sent to, save the proverbial kitty on the tree too many times, and the next time you get an alert, say, whatever. I don't have time for another kitty, and you ignore that, and of course you get the false negative, where your house burns down, which in Santa Barbara is a pretty close to home, pun intended, metaphor. So the important thing is that you cannot use only anomaly detection. You want something that combines the two. You want to ground anomaly detection with good detection. So anomaly detection is not bad, but sometimes it's sold as the only thing that you need to have. No, you have to have something that tells you, I am absolutely sure that this is bad. Now look at all this anomalous stuff around it. Because if you can do that, for example, I know that that point right there is compromised. I saw malware on that host. I saw CNC communication. I saw it downloaded something that is a DLL, that is a classic update for this type of Emotet installment. Well, and I saw a certain pattern of CPU usage. I saw that it called particular host outside. Well, can I find other hosts in my network that have similarities to this? They have the same type of anomalous behavior? Because if I can do this, suddenly I can see more of the intrusion. It's just not a punctual intrusion. It's like, this is all that it goes around it. These are the hosts involved. You want the big picture. And that's why anomaly is very useful. You can use it for threat hunting to find additional information. So imagine that the holy grail of this is anomaly detection plus AI plus threat intelligence. You need it all, and you need it together. So you can look at anomaly detection as enabled by machine learning as a source of events. Those are not alerts. Call it events. Then you can compose these events with something that is very precise, but maybe miss some aspect, but at least when it tells you this is being compromised, threat detection the right way, you know that that machine is compromised. Then you look at the anomalous event and say, okay, this is bad. What's anomalous around it? Good, okay. Are these anomalies elsewhere in my network? Then that can be a good source of threat hunting material. So this is important because if you think about it, you want to move, anomaly tells you this is weird, okay? And if you want, the rule-based system tells you this is bad, and I'm sure. But if you combine the two together, you can find that this situation is this bad because anomaly detection gives you the extra information to understand how bad the threat is in your network, how connected to other hosts, why this compromised host is now connecting to a backend database. Now, I know that that data is compromised too, and that has been told to me by the anomaly detection system because that host never talked to a backend database in the past. So this is really important. Unfortunately, we don't have it yet. It would be nice to have it and be able to deploy it, yesterday. But research and innovation is working on it. And I think that there are good directions in this path, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And in conclusion, I want you to get out of this that machine learning is not some crazy magic thing. Now you know about supervised, unsupervised. You know how it's applying security. You know that in an adversarial setting, you cannot just do it. You have to be very careful because there are some obvious limitations, and you want to be able to combine machine learning, threat intel, and security to obtain a useful use of this tool. And of course, on the last concept is that you have to understand your threat model well. So when you deploy something, understand what you're trying to catch, because if you're catching, you want to stop nation states is one thing. If you want to stop, cyber criminal that are financially motivated might be a different thing. And also, you have to bring back the humans in the loop. This idea that, you can scale the process and forget about the humans, I don't think it's true. I think that you can elevate the level of discourse using artificial intelligence. But certain patterns, certain decisions still require humans to interpret, create context, and fully address the threat. Thank you very much. Questions? Silence. Yes?
If you have a question, we'll wait for a microphone.
I can walk now.
Okay, Larry Kahn at UC Berkeley. So, great talk. the impression I'm getting from this is that, you know, this has always been an arms race, and this is just the next version of the arms race. Am I being overly pessimistic, or is it going to raise the bar?
I think it raises the bar. I think that escaping from the arms race is unfortunately impossible. I think that it's just the way it is. It's, you know, that's why warfare has been around for, 40,000 years. It's just the way it is. So I think that claiming that you have a final solution to something is, and you solve the security problem, is not realistic. I think that artificial intelligence allows you to do things in a way more efficient fashion and at a higher scale with, where you can really not waste your time on menial tasks. And eventually this level will raise and raise and raise. But the bad guys are using artificial intelligence too. I mean, deepfakes is one classic example of an attack that leverages artificial intelligence. There was a recent case, I don't know how confirmed it is, so it could be, floating in urban legend land, but there was a business executive, business email compromise where actually the call on the phone was simulated so that it would have the German accent of the CEO when something was asked for, transfer money and things like that. That would seem, extremely sophisticated, but we see, the bad guys are definitely using not only they try to bypass artificial intelligence, but they're also, looking at how they can, for example, in targeted attack, model in a very precise way their target so they conform to the style of communication or the type of communication between various actors. So I think that getting away from the arms race is going to be really difficult. You have to continue to innovate. I say that as a researcher, but I also say that also as somebody who provides security solution as the CTO of my company. We constantly research new things, because the moment you stop, you become obsolete in the matter of months. You become useless. And so, unfortunately, this takes a lot of energy. We would like to be able to, every once in a while take a breath and sip on a pina colada, but I don't think we're in that business. Yes. Carmen.
You mentioned filtering the data when you're bringing data in, and that reminds me of a similar thing that people talk about on the big data side of cleaning up your data. Do you have any insights on how that can be done more effectively, and how we know which data needs to be cleaned up or improved, and how not to just introduce your bias right back into your data when you're cleaning it up? Yeah.
So it's a very difficult problem, and it actually is the focus of some research, including research in our lab. There are two aspects of the problem here. There is a problem of scarcity, because while you have a lot of images, you think you have a lot of attacks and a lot of malware, but for certain types of algorithms, sometimes not enough. So especially network activity, if you think about, you have terabytes of traffic every day that you can look at, but how much of that traffic is actually malicious? Like a few thousand connections. That's nothing. And so you have already a problem there just in extracting the right information and having enough of it. The problem in filtering is that if you start looking, some people advocate to take out outliers, do some kind of filtering, say, okay, this stuff is so far here that we take it out, so it's not going to be part of our model. Otherwise, our model is going to be all cattywampus and consider that as part two. The problem with that is that you become less robust to adversarial perturbation. So there is actual research in introducing noise. So instead of filtering, adding noise to your data so that it becomes more resistant to variations that could be evasive. So this is in general a very difficult problem. I think that I'd like to step back and think about filtering as more of exposing what's representative of a piece of data. So to me, I go back to the example of malware. We have seen a lot of people taking malware statically, like a binary, like this is the data of the malware. I want to learn to recognize this. And because of packing, they make all sorts of mistakes, and they make them extremely vulnerable to evasion. Mistakes, because guess what is the software that looks exactly like malware with anti-evasion, anti-analysis techniques? That, but more than that, more common than anti-malware? Video games. They have crazy stuff in them, you know, because they don't want to be, they want to prevent people from cheating, so they have anti-debugging, anti-analysis, and it looks exactly, they call back home for updates. Sounds familiar? You know, it looks like malware. So you gotta, if you just look at the outside, say, oh, this is obfuscated, that's bad. You're gonna have a lot of false positives. And so it is, my non-answer to you is, it's damn hard. And depending on the domain in which you are, you can do some things to improve. One thing, for example, is learning not on the static version of software, but on the dynamic behavior. That's what I really believe in. In other situations, you might not be as lucky. Yeah, there was a thing. Oh, I think we're
out of time.
All right.
Are you going to be available for questions if people?
Is there a break? Because I also have to go to teach, so. Perfect. I'm going to be here for the break. Then, unfortunately, I have to go to teach. But thank you very much.